Hi, my name is Bob DeGemmis. Welcome to the Bob DeGemmis Show, where we talk about all things amateur and youth athletics. This is the first show of hopefully an ongoing series so that I can convey some of the ideas and messages that I pass along daily on an individual level to the masses. And hopefully some of the people that I see on a regular basis can see this, as well as other people that maybe have never spoken with me but can see my message and what I do and maybe take it and hopefully use it in their own practices as well. A little bit about myself, what I do now. I wear a number of different hats. I'm a scholastic hockey and soccer coach. I'm a skills coach for hockey and soccer. I teach skating and skills at a couple different ice rinks in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And then probably my most important role is the fact that I founded and now run an athletic club called the Red Line Athletic Club, which is a multi-sport club that is for amateur athletes from cradle to grave, basically offering an opportunity for players to play seasonal sports, which is becoming a thing that has been pushed aside by a lot of professional amateur and youth sports people. Basically, the way we run the club, we have very distinct seasons. So we run a fall season that starts basically September 1 and then goes until the middle of November. We have another winter season that goes from the middle of November until mid-March, a spring season that runs from mid-March until mid-June, and then we, of course, have summertime. We have different programming then. But it's very traditional. I'm from New England. I think it's very much a New England NESCAC scholastic model that has always been there and is still there, and I think has a lot of value. And I'm trying to bring that to the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area for hockey, soccer, and lacrosse. Because here, what's happened is, and it's not only here, it's everywhere, but it's especially here because we don't have a tradition of hockey that's scholastic based. Therefore, hockey has become a 8 to 12 month endeavor for players very young. Soccer has become a 10-month endeavor from September until May for different reasons, but some the same. And lacrosse has done the same as well and become a year-round affair. There's reasons why these sports have come around. There's certain big events, the advent of professional opportunities, as well as media coverage have really driven why youth sports has gone this way. And I think that it isn't necessarily a good thing for a lot of players. It's good for consumers who like to watch and be fans. It's good for players that are very high end, who are going to maybe get scholarships or be professionals. But for the vast majority of participants that are amateur, it isn't necessarily the best set of circumstances. So what I'm doing is trying to create an environment that is a good environment for youth and also adult players, where they can play both recreationally and competitively, but amateur levels, through their life. Let's talk a little bit about each specific sport. We'll talk about hockey, soccer, and lacrosse and why the seasons have sort of stretched out. Let's look at hockey first. Hockey has changed a lot since the late 90s. I'm a 38-year-old right now, so my experience with hockey was a lot different than kids nowadays. When I was a kid, there wasn't really any hockey opportunity south of New England. It existed, but it was not very big. It was, of course, more regional: New England, New York, upper Midwest, maybe a little bit of Colorado, of course, Alaska. And then there's other places that had influence, of course, even in Philadelphia and the Mid-Atlantic, but it wasn't as big as it is now. So in the 80s and the 70s, the NHL was comprised primarily of Canadian players. 90 90% of players were going to be Canadian, maybe 3% American, and the rest left over Scandinavian or something like that. And then the first Russians moved into the league in the early 90s, the Berets and the Fedorovs that were defecting, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, at the time, say in the 80s, an American hockey player, his aspirations, his highest possible goal could be, number one, make the Olympic team for the United States, and then two, try and play professional hockey. So if you go back and you look at the Miracle on Ice team in 1980, of that team, only a handful of players really made a career out of playing the National Hockey League or professional hockey. I mean, some of the biggest names did not. Jim Craig, Mike Eruzione did not become professional hockey players as a livelihood. A few did: Ken Morrow, Dave Christian, and a couple others. But that was the best of what the U.S. had to offer, and even of that best, maybe 10 to 12 players did it. Fast forward to 1990 or 1988, the Olympic Committee basically makes the announcement that Olympic teams, all sports, will be able to be fielded with professional athletes. So this changes things a lot. And simultaneously, ESPN is growing and it's covering more hockey, college hockey, NHL at the time. So the U.S. Olympic Committee decides that, USA Hockey, now USA Hockey, then Amateur Hockey Association of the U.S., is going to put American professionals into the Olympics. So the Amateur Hockey Association moniker is no longer applicable because now we're going to be using professional. So they have to strike that, make it into USA Hockey. And then 1998 in Nagano, that was the first year that professionals, NHLers, were allowed to play in the Olympics. So between 1988 and 1998, that was a huge expansion of Americans getting into the NHL, and it's still continuing. Now, what's good about hockey when I was a kid is that because those opportunities did not exist, the emphasis for players were really local and scholastic. So if you were living in Minnesota or Connecticut or Massachusetts or Michigan or different places, you probably just wanted to play high school hockey and seasonal hockey, and then hopefully maybe college hockey, and then that was it. And the same can be said for soccer, and we'll talk about that shortly. Come the late 80s and then into the 90s, when more and more players are getting exposed because of television, and because professionals are now in the NHL or in the Olympics, there's more opportunity for high-level players. And then, of course, in the 90s, the other thing was that the NHL expanded. Many teams were added in the 90s. You had San Jose, Anaheim, Florida, Tampa, Carolina, Atlanta, Nashville, et cetera, Dallas. And not only did they move, they were immediately good in winning. Dallas winning Stanley Cups. Carolina has won a Stanley Cup and gone to the finals. Nashville has gone very far. Florida in the 90s went deep. Tampa has gone to the finals and also won. Anaheim in the early 2000s gone to the final and won. So immediately those expansion places got interest, and then got local hockey going. But again, what hasn't changed is that the feeder element to the NHL is still in Canada, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Canadian Hockey League. But what has changed is that NCAA hockey, rather than being the pinnacle for an American player, is now a stepping stone for the NHL. And what's also different but the same is that there's about the same amount of teams at the NCAA Division I level now, 60. But of course, there's many, many more players, and also Canadians and foreigners that want to play university hockey in the United States. So it's that much more competitive. So the reality is now, you might have the worst team of the 60 and have players drafted on that team versus back in 1980, you could have the best players of all the college teams, and only half of them would make the NHL. So that's a massive step forward. As for soccer, around the same time, things are changing again because of television media, ESPN coverage. That changed things, and then also specifically the events. So in 1990, the U.S. national team, men's team, makes it to the World Cup in Italy. 1994, we host the World Cup in the United States, and then within 2 years, we have a domestic professional league, Major League Soccer. So kids who are playing soccer, finishing their career in the early or mid 90s, their experience as a kid was that you played soccer because you loved it, you wanted to play high school soccer, and maybe your goal would be to play high-level college soccer and national championship. But it was an amateur endeavor. You weren't going to play for a World Cup. You weren't going to go abroad. You weren't going to play professional, domestic. Kids who grew up in the mid-90s all of a sudden see this, and their experience is that's normal, that there is a World Cup opportunity, there is MLS, and there are players that go abroad, and therefore the youth programs reflect that. So therefore, club programs, private programs, start stripping away power from scholastic teams. The programming is certainly higher level, but their goals are loftier. Their goal is to produce players that can play at the national and international level. And the same thing with hockey. And as a result, the loser has been, if there's a loser, that the players that did not get the attention and the programming were players that either wanted to play seasonally or were not as good as the highest level. Now, the good news is that for all the gloom and doom that there is about youth sports participation falling off, I don't think it'll ever end. It may have capped in certain sports, but I think kids will always play sports. And that might mean different sports. Yes, some sports might lose players. Baseball is losing players. American football is losing players for different reasons. Some sports are gaining. Of course, lacrosse, it's very accessible. And players across the country are starting to play lacrosse in places that didn't have that 15, 20 years ago. Rugby is becoming increasingly big. What used to be a fraternity type scenario where kids would pick it up in college more as like a party scene is now a serious athletic endeavor, but it's still amateur. And I think the draw for sports like rugby today are the same draw that kids had to soccer 30 years ago, or lacrosse 20 to 30 years ago, or even hockey 30 years ago. And the draw is that most likely their parents did not play it. They had to own it. And their parents weren't pushing them towards something high level because it didn't even exist. So your youth hockey, your youth soccer, your youth lacrosse experience as a kid, when there aren't these giant opportunities, it's something for fun, and it's because you want to win with your friends. You own it, and you're doing it for its own sake. As soon as these other opportunities made themselves available, as well as more parents who had actually played the game and can actually speak to it, makes for a more pressurized environment, pushing kids toward this stuff, when the reality is that it's not necessarily the best for most kids, and it really isn't. But we are where we are, and I think high school sports, if you take a look at it, and the problem is, I think a lot of people figure it out late, is that high school sports is as great as it's ever been. If you go to a local hockey game, soccer game, lacrosse game, you go to an environment where there's 400 to 1,000 people at your game, you're probably not going to experience that again. There aren't too many club teams who pull those kind of draws, even if it's a higher level. That's wonderful. But you know what? In the end, most of those players might never get to play in front of anybody. And they might never win anything either. So the emphasis has changed from at one time being competitive for your school and your community, and people started to knock amateur and youth sports for win at all costs, and that it was all about winning. But that in a way was good. Today, what the emphasis is on in team sports, which is unfortunate because it's missing the real teaching point of that winning element, is that it doesn't matter if you win, you just want to improve individually so you can move up through the levels. But the thing is, everybody cashes out at some point. And what's left for the people who don't make it to the highest levels, or what's left for even the people who do make it to the highest level but never get to win anything and share it with their teammates, it doesn't leave very much. So there's something to be said for working with your group, being part of a team, whether it's the first line guy or the last person on the team, like Rudy and the water guy. Being part of something that's trying to accomplish a team goal is very important. And I think a lot of select and elite teams sort of neglect that because they're so interested in moving players along the pipeline. And then ironically, I sort of think that that's showing up at our top levels, because you know what? We still haven't won an Olympic hockey gold medal since 1980. And we're still a country that's many times bigger than world champions in soccer like Germany or Italy. But you know what? We still don't win it all. So that's my first segment of the Bob DeGemmis Show. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Feel free to contact me anytime. My email is rlacmetros@gmail.com, and there'll be more of these to come. Have a great day.